You are all set.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I call to order this Board of Education Curriculum Committee meeting, Friday, January 17th at 11 a.m. We have a full agenda this morning, so we'll get right to it. I will turn it over to Ms. Gillette. The first item for discussion on the agenda is measurements and proficiency report on the 2024 grades 3 through 12 state standardized assessments.
Okay, good morning, everybody. John, can you put up our slides, please? So welcome everybody to our presentation on measurements of growth and proficiency according to the mandated state assessments. I will quickly give the team a chance to introduce themselves before we begin.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Jeff Corbishley. I'm the 612 Math and Science Supervisor here in the Curriculum Office.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Linda Johnson, the Director of Elementary Education.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Annie Tucci, 612 Humanities Supervisor.
Great. Next slide, please. The goal of this presentation is to show the growth and proficiency levels of our students who take the state assessments. We will begin this presentation with defining the difference between growth and proficiency. Then we will look at our growth in comparison to districts across the state and our growth by cohort over time. We will then shift and look at our proficiency scores in comparison to first ourselves and then to our neighboring districts. We will end with a response to the data and next steps. So one thing to note, in this presentation, we will not cover what the assessments require of students and what the communication to parents will look like. For this information, please refer to the Engaged page on the curriculum website or the Engaged tab under the Teaching and Learning section on the main website. Next page, please. So here is the big conversation here, the difference between growth and proficiency. Proficiency measures what students know at a given point in time compared to grade level expectations. Growth highlights how much students are learning over a time period, regardless of their starting point. For many years, districts have based this conversation about standardized test scores solely on proficiency. That is, only highlighting the percentage of students who were able to reach proficiency, again, grade level standards or not. While this is important data, and of course, obviously always our goal, it does not acknowledge student growth. Even more importantly, proficiency should not be a surprise. We should already know as a school district the percentage of our students who are not yet proficient with grade level standards, because we have already identified those students as having individual educational plans or students who are in the intervention pathway for MTSS. In the last 3 years at RPS, we have come closer and closer to our assessment of proficiency matching the results of the state data. As you have heard in past presentations, in areas where there was a disconnect between those two numbers, we had to make pacing and curriculum adjustments, specifically in math at the middle school level and science at the high school level. This was done to make sure that students were prepared for the standards that they were going to be assessed on, thus giving them the ability to demonstrate their proficiency. At RPS, we have worked very, very hard to shift the focus on growth for all students. We believe that with this as our North Star, we will move more students to proficiency and ensure that our students are all growing at a minimum of a year's growth in a year's time, and in some cases, maybe more, regardless of where they entered the beginning of the year. Next slide, please. So quickly, we just want to remind you of the state assessments that are required that we will be discussing in this presentation. The Smarter Balanced Assessment in Mathematics and ELA in grades 3 through 8, SAT School Day for grade 11, and then the Next Generation Science Assessment in grades 5, 8, and 11. Next slide, please. So let's begin by looking at growth in Ridgefield Public Schools. Next slide. In the past, we've been asked by the board, how do we measure success? How do we measure the impact of curriculum changes, pedagogy, new resources, etc.? One of the ways that we can do this is by measuring growth. This scatter plot from EdSite highlights both growth and performance. You can see that growth is represented on the vertical axis and performance on the horizontal axis. Ridgefield is that orange dot. And all the other dots on there are the districts in Connecticut. Our orange dot represents 1,626 students in grades 4 through 8. And because this is measuring growth, we cannot have third graders here because they didn't take the test the year before. Now this scatter plot is showing us ELA, growth and proficiency. In ELA, we are approaching where we want to be, high performance and high growth in that upper quadrant there. Last year, we had a performance index of 79.9, where we exceeded Connecticut's target of 75. And that's really based on the proficiency numbers in math, in just literacy across all those grade levels. The average percentage of growth targets achieved by our students was 67.2%. That means that 67.2% of our students met the growth goal from year to year on these state standardized assessments. This is an area where we want to continue to improve. This is our first time using this scatter plot, which is a fancy word, but we do feel like it best represents where our district is moving, and that's into that upper quadrant there. Next slide, please. So let's take a minute here to zoom in on growth in just Ridgefield. This is a look at the cohort of students that are currently freshmen at Ridgefield High School. And when you look closely, you can see that the trend line here, that orange line across the years, shows increased growth and recovery after COVID. So you can see the one box that doesn't have a dot on it, the second one in from the left, that is the year that none of us took the assessments. And then you can see, following the trend line, how our students performed after COVID. Now, this growth that you see, first a flat line and then an increase, was achieved despite the fact that these assessments increase in complexity from year to year. While we continue to work to grow our programming and support our teachers through high-impact professional learning, we believe that this growth represents the outcome of the work of our staff and, of course, our students. So that was our growth in ELA. So let's go to the next slide and take a look at mathematics. So here's our scatter plot for mathematics. And this is all based on the assessments that our students took in the spring. We can see in this scatter plot that Ridgefield, the orange dot again, is just entering the upper quadrant. Here we have in mathematics a 78.3 performance index, again exceeding the state set target of 75. That's based on just our students' proficiency. The average percentage of growth targets achieved by our students here is 74.8. That means that even more of our students, 74.8%, met the growth goal from the last assessment. Again, this plot represents students in grades 4 through 8 with a total of 1,599 students. Next slide, please. So going back to that same cohort again and looking at the trend growth across the years, the math trend line shows that in mathematics, our students have just about fully recovered to pre-COVID performance. And you can see in the very last box on the far right, you can see that we're almost into that darker blue quadrant. You see that also that the transition points, 5th to 6th, does not show a drop, which has been a focus area for our curriculum teams for the last several years. So what we just went through was a look at the growth of our students over the last year from test to test. We will now transition into sharing our proficiency results. Next slide, please. And then next slide, please.
So Jeff, Linda, and I will be presenting the results for grades 3 through 8 and grade 11 in the areas of mathematics, ELA, and science standardized assessments. These include the Smarter Balance, NGSS, and SAT. While we present, you will hear a summary of RPS results and a comparison to similar districts. And in the preparation of this presentation, for ease of viewing, you will notice that all the percentage numbers are rounded to the nearest whole number. So what you see on the slide here are our 4 achievement levels. So for Smarter Balance, NGSS, and SAT, the achievement levels are described as levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. Both 3 and 4 are combined in the percentages and described, as you'll hear them, as meeting or exceeding benchmark. And another consideration to note when analyzing those levels, you'll think back to that graphic that was provided to you about cohort growth, and you'll recall how those bars shift up over time. And that shows how a course, over the course of multiple grade levels, that the test does become increasingly more complex. Next slide, please. Throughout this presentation, you will see different types of graphs to represent the data. So this graph is a year-to-year comparison of spring testing for 2023 and for 2024. And it is different from that cohort data that you saw before. This data shows the percent of students who have met or exceeded benchmark. This visual representation allows us basically to do 2 things. First, we can compare achievement from grade to grade. So for example, you can draw your eye to any grade level, but draw your eye to grade 7. Grade 7 students in 2023 is a different cohort than the students in 2024. So we aim to see those high levels of achievement year to year. The second way to use this graph is to consider growth from the previous year. And this is a story that's very exciting. So for example, grade 3 students who experience the assessment for the first time show an 8% growth from 2023 to 2024 when they are in grade 4. You can also see in 2023, grade 5 students maintaining proficiency on an increasingly more complex assessment and meeting a higher benchmark score in order to maintain that achievement. This particular story that the data shows is a celebration because it's inconsistent with state and national results. Typically, we would have seen a drop or a slide during those transition years, and we did not last year. This is the result of an intentional focus on transitions, curriculum alignment, and teachers implementing curriculum revisions across schools. So again, this is a big celebration. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Annie. And once again, good morning, everyone. This slide shows student performance at all levels in ELA, which has been requested in past years, so it is important to continue to share it. At the elementary level, at least 50% of the students are at level 4, with a greater percentage of students at level 4 than 3, similar to last year. We also noticed that in grades 3 and 4, there was movement in the other levels. In the middle school grades, we made significant growth leading up to 2023. We maintained growth in 2024, which is one of our goals that we set each year. Another notice is that by the end of the middle school experience, fewer students are performing at level 1, which has been a consistent result over the past 2 years. Next slide.
I was on mute. This table shows RPS in comparison to similar districts. So when looking at these tables, you will notice the scores are ranked. While this ranking shows a list view, it's important to notice the closeness of those benchmark score percentages. Think back to that bubble plot graphic. If these scores were plotted similarly, they would be so close as almost on top of each other. While this view does show us that Ridgefield is showing high performance within our reference group, our main purpose for data analysis is to deeply understand the insights and how it informs to support all growth for all of our RPS students. Next slide.
Great, thanks, Annie. So this graphic shows a year-to-year comparison of scores by grade level in mathematics, and it represents the percent of students who reach either a level 3 or 4. Right, it is important to note that a comparison between the 2023 green bar and the 2024 blue bar shows the growth on that grade level exam, but with different students. So at the elementary level, you'll notice that there is overall consistency. For example, grade 3 increasing by 2 percentage points, grade 5 decreasing by 2 percentage points, and grade 4 remaining the same. Right? Our elementary grade levels are consistently around 80% who have met or exceeded the benchmark. At the middle school level, you'll notice that there has been growth in every grade level. Grade 6 and grade 7 both increasing by 3 percentage points, and grade 8 growing substantially by 10 percentage points. Right? This year-to-year comparison helps us make important curricular decisions, as we've already mentioned. But another highlight to showcase in this display is the year-to-year comparison that we can make within a cohort, similar to what Annie was talking about before. For example, you will see that the green bar in grade 6 and the blue bar in grade 7 shows a specific cohort. That cohort grew from 70% to 77% who have met or exceeded the benchmark. So if we look at data using this cohort view, it does allow us to support the growth of all students at different proficiency levels. Next slide, please.
Okay, we're going to stay in the area of mathematics, and this slide shows performance at each level in math. At the elementary level, you will notice over 50% of students performed at level 4, similar to the performance in ELA. There was also an increase in level 4 in 3rd and 4th grades, while the performance in 5th grade stayed fairly consistent. At the secondary level, there was an increase in the percentage of students who reached level 4 with a greater growth in 8th grade. Next slide.
All right, so when we look at the percent of students who met or exceeded benchmark compared to our similar neighboring districts, we are able to see some variation depending on the cohort of students. It is important to note when looking at any list put in rank order, we have to pay attention, as Annie said, to the closeness of the percent of students within that ranking. So while there are certain cohorts in certain grade levels with a larger spread, such as grade 5 or grade 6, you'll notice that in grade 7, the percentage of students who met or exceeded benchmark is rather close together. Right? It's also important to put all these percentages in context to the actual number of students. So for example, in grade 7 in 2024, 1% represents approximately 3 students. So small changes in the number of students would affect this ranking from year to year, which is why we always see every district move in rank depending on that particular cohort of students. So while this view does provide us with some insights, our main focus in Ridgefield continues to be on the growth of all students. And it's a reason we focus more heavily on analyzing the number of students in our levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 performance levels. Next slide, please.
So let's shift gears to SAT at RHS. The College Board sets the benchmark score of 480 for the evidence-based reading and writing section. This assessment is totally different than our Smarter Balance and NGSS assessments because it does not measure proficiency. Rather, the SAT is a prediction that the students will earn at least a C or better in their first semester English course in college. So our data has shown a consistent percentage of students meeting benchmark and having consistent average scores. This is due to high quality literacy instruction, programming, and course offerings. The high school departments, specifically English and social studies, we closely analyze data and adjust courses, curriculum, and instruction to support students over time. One specific change we made to the graduation requirements this year was adding foundations in modern history to grade 9. Not only for the continuity of social studies instruction, but also for that repeated practice for literacy skills of informational texts. Now that we have have the PSAT 8-9 and PSAT 10, we will begin to be able to more deeply understand year-to-year growth in specific areas of the assessment. Next slide.
Great. So as we look at the SAT math data, the first thing you need to notice is that the average score required to reach benchmark has risen from a 480 to a 530. Right? This value is determined by the College Board because it is a predictor that a student will earn at least a C or better in a mathematics course in college. So due to grading practices and the math-specific disciplines at the college level, this difference in benchmark score relates to the higher level of mathematical knowledge that a student needs to have in order to get that C in a credit-bearing first semester math course. Right, so our data has shown a rather consistent percentage of students in each of our performance levels over the last 3 years. Right, the average score has increased from 2023 to 2024, but we still do not see major shifts in our student performance overall. So the high school math department has been closely analyzing this data and adjusting curriculum and instructional practices to address this pattern over the last 3 years. Right, the high school administrative team and the math department have really made this work a priority, which you will have and you will continue to see reflected in the budget requests and the future presentations. All right, next slide. Right, so as we have shown you with the rest of our data, right, this graphic shows our neighboring districts and the comparison of the average score in both math and evidence-based reading and writing. So we did this ranking based off of the average score in math for the SAT for each section. You'll see on the screen, the order is based, again, on that average score, the orange, and you'll notice the percentages for evidence-based reading and writing are much higher than math. We have to remember that that is highlighting the difference in the benchmark score that is required on the 2 different sections of the assessment. Next slide, please.
Okay, now we're going to shift gears to science. Next, we're going to look at the results from the Next Generation Science Standards Summative Assessment, which is administered in grades 5, 8, and 11. Not only does this assessment measure the science standards, it also includes a high level of close reading skills and Tier 3 content-specific vocabulary, which is something we pay very close attention to when setting goals for curriculum development. This slide shows the summary results for the past 2 years across the 3 grade levels. And as you can see, the majority of our students reach proficiency. While the majority of students did reach proficiency in 5th grade, there was a decline from last year. Note a change in cohorts. At the secondary level, there was growth in the 8th and 11th grades. A highlight to showcase is 11th grade, with an increase from 68% to 75%. As some of you may remember from past presentations, Jeff and his curriculum teams have been working hard to revise the science curriculum at the secondary level to be more aligned with the next generation science standards. This is just one example of why responsive curriculum development is important. Next slide. And these charts show student performance at each level in science, levels 1, 2, 3, 4. There are shifts in all levels that support the percentage of students who reach the proficiency goal that you saw on the previous slide. This year, the majority of students are reaching level 3. And next slide. Reference group. As we've shown you with other data, this graphic shows our neighboring districts and the proficiency comparisons in science. The order represents the percentage of students meeting or exceeding proficiency. When we look at the percentage of students who met or exceeded the benchmark compared to similar districts, we can see variation depending on the cohort of students. As Jeff mentioned earlier, when looking at any list put in rank order, it is extremely important to pay close attention to the closeness of the percentage of students within that ranking. Certain cohorts in certain grades have a larger spread, such as grade 5 and grade 11, while if you look at grade 8, the percentages are closer together. Once again, it's also important to contextualize these percentages to the actual number of students. Small changes in the number of students would affect this ranking from year to year, which is why districts can move in this rank view depending on particular cohorts of students. While this view does provide us with insights, again, our main focus continues to be on the growth of all students. And this is one reason why we analyze the number of students in all performance levels. Next slide.
Responding to data, looking backwards and moving forwards. The big takeaway here is that we need to continue the work that we're doing. We need to continue development and growth of all departments. Our collaborative reboot of MTSS K-8, the creation of data teams, and a digital warehouse. I could go on, all done by a highly engaged group of educators and leaders thoughtfully working towards meeting the needs of all students. In areas where we have focused, we have found success. Look at our increases in mathematics. And we need to continue to support the identified learning loss for our high school math students, as evidenced by the SAT results. The fiscal year 25 budget supported a new math interventionist at the high school to help target and teach into missed conceptual understanding for our Algebra 2 and geometry students. And that's content that is on the math SAT. In addition to the support of our Algebra 1 labs, which we already had in place, we believe that these targeted additions, alongside all the other program development K-8 and the work of all our teams, will help us to continue to show growth in mathematics across the district. To foster growth in ELA, we have added a graduation requirement for foundational 9th grade social studies, as you heard from Dr. Tucci, and in many other presentations, and we continue to refine and strengthen our instructional practices and resources in ELA K-8. In conclusion, know that we take this data seriously, and we study it alongside our district data to make revisions, celebrate successes, and continue to work towards growth for all students at RPS. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to the team, and we're ready to take any questions.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive presentation. It was fantastic. Thank you. Any questions?
I have some.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Paradiso.
So thank you all for this presentation, and thank you for all the hard work and the progress that's been made across all of the different grade cohorts and subject matters. As a parent, when I look at this and I see the data synthesized into district-wide data, the first question, obviously, that I have, I'm sure Dr. De Silva knows what that question is what does this look like by school, right? And I'm a little disappointed that we don't see it by school, honestly, because I think that to me is an indicator of we're making progress as a district, but what is being done from the standpoint of providing resources equitably across our elementary schools, all 6 of them, to ensure that if we see, one of the things I did while we were presenting was I went to the state site, I downloaded all the data by school, and I pivoted it and I took a look at it. And what I could see is that there are some to me, what seem to be statistically significant differences by school in the performance on each of these standardized tests. And so I guess my question ultimately is, what explains those differences? Are they statistically significant? And what is the approach that the administration has to address if we see one elementary school performing not as well in math as the other elementary schools? How do we address that? What happens next?
Thank you. I'm going to let Dr. De Silva go in 1 second, because I know what she's going to say. But I do want to start out by saying that analysis for sure 100% happens, and that all those factors are taken into consideration by this team and by all of our buildings and our building leadership. So Dr. De Silva.
John, Mr. Paradiso, excuse me, we'll be glad to share if you want to see the results by school so that you're not doing that work on your own. I think we have to be careful with the word statistically significant. And I know my colleague, Dr. Corbishley, will correct me if I'm wrong, because there's statistically significant and then there's practically significant. And I think with both of those terms, neither apply. And the reason that I say that is because the population within these classrooms is so incredibly diverse. And that is often why, I don't want to say hesitance, but why it isn't as meaningful to show the community the comparisons among schools, because there are classrooms with cohorts of students who, for example, may be second language learners. There are other classrooms that have students with significant special education needs. And as a result, those students may either not perform as well on that exam and or take an alternative type of exam. And so when and as the Board of Education knows, across our schools, we have different types of programs, right? Some of us have RISE, some of those RISE programs are in the intermediate, some of them are primary, we might have pathways, and not to suggest that those students that are receiving specialized instruction are underperforming, and I don't want anyone to suggest that. However, their progress might look different than other students. And so when you compare, and we've noticed this over time, people may be drawing relationships, which I think is the best way in which it could be used that make sense, and other times people might be drawing relationships that don't. And so what we look at is exactly what we just described, is looking at growth, proficiency. We look at student by student, and I think Ms. Gillette, when she started off her presentation today, said it best when she said, we shouldn't have any surprises. And so we should know over time how our students are performing, whether it's on this measure or any other measure, because what we really want to know is how we're intervening with students along the way. Again, not for the purpose of a standardized test, but because we want to see how students are performing against the grade level standards. And for some students, they're working on grade level standards and other standards that they may not have captured yet. And then the other piece, just to go back to the second language learners, what we know about second language learners is that it takes them 5 to 7 years to develop academic language. And so you may have a school and or a classroom that has more students whose proficiency is lower at a particular school or classroom. And what we wouldn't want is judgments to be made upon that classroom when we recognize that those students are going to achieve academic language at a different rate in which their typical peers may. Again, depends on the student, depends on their proficiency level. So because we don't share with the Board of Education that very micro level of student by student by student, it could represent misinformation. And we've actually seen that happen in the past. So that's one of the reasons that we don't, because we don't think that the information is incredibly valuable without going student by student as we do. But we certainly can share with the Board of Education if you'd like to see student performance by school. We're glad to do that, and we have that. So certainly we look at it, and we also look at it for other reasons. Are we seeing trends? Are we seeing that our newer teachers, for example, may need support in a particular academic area of teaching more than others? Are we going to have to make up some time if a teacher, based on the dynamics of their students, were at not at the same scope and sequence, at the same level in their scope and sequence as others? Meaning, some teachers may be a unit ahead, where other teachers might be a unit behind, and that particular unit may have been tested on that particular exam, whatever exam it is or test it is. So all of that information is used to decide, okay, where are we with our students? Where do we maybe have to make up some time with some students? Where do we maybe have to shift our professional learning with our teachers? Perhaps there was a leave of absence. All of that plays into how we work with our students either that same year and or the following year.
And just to assure everyone, this is work that happens all year long because we have our own assessments. This presentation is just on the state standardized assessments that are summative that happen at the end of the year, but our district assessments, our universal screeners, those are 3 times a year. And then we have all our curriculum-based assessments. So the work that Dr. De Silva described, that is the curriculum committee's work in concert with Ms. Johnson, Mr. Corbishley, Dr. Tucci, and then all of our building leadership teams. So all of those questions that you're asking, we know all those answers. And the truth of the matter is that we have worked really hard on this team to make sure that when those proficiency results come out, we're not surprised, because we already know that we have students who are making sometimes 2 years growth and still not hitting proficiency rates. We know all of that information, and it is our job to make sure that they are prepared and ready to show their best when they get to those assessments. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for that, and I'm especially appreciative of sort of those final comments there about, you know, how you're looking at that data. I would say though, and I encourage us, because I'll tell you, it's happening outside of this committee, right? Like when these assessment scores come out, the first thing a parent does is they go to see their grade at their school and see what it was. So I think when we don't share that information and don't discuss it at this committee level, it could be perceived as us not doing what exactly you said you were doing. So I would encourage us not just to think about us as sort of district-wide assessment scoring, which I think is important. Obviously, we want to see where we stand next to the DIR. We want to see how much progress we've made as a single cohort. But I would also want to make sure that we're addressing the community's concerns. If I have a child at one school and that school is performing really well, that's something to celebrate. I should feel really, really good about that, obviously, right? But so I don't think it's all negative. It's not a gotcha. But I will tell you that there's definitely a space between how each individual class or student with their given individual circumstances and how we do as a total of thousands of students. There's a space in between there. And I think we need to share that information with the community and discuss it publicly if possible. Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Paradiso, before?
That was it.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to share a couple of my thoughts and questions as well. First, thank you so much for this. The scores are fantastic, and it's really, there's a lot to celebrate in the Ridgefield Public Schools. So thank you for this. It's clear how much work you're doing on this. And, you know, I commend you, first of all, on starting your presentation talking about focusing on growth, because it's so incredibly important to focus on growth and to recognize that children are individuals, unique individuals who are on their own bell curve. And there are many districts who focus on proficiency and solely focus on proficiency. They may give lip service to growth. So I really appreciate that you do the work and you value growth, because you know, standardized testing is one data point. It's one data point. And, you know, when we talk about how do we measure success, it's such a loaded question. And I know you started with that. And so I love that you're sharing this. It's important information for the community, but I think it's also important to recognize that it's one data point, and there's so much more that goes into what success looks like for kids, you know? And I know every teacher would agree with that statement, because there's such nuance in learning, right? I mean, some kids sit down on that standardized test day and they really struggle with that particular assessment, yet they're experiencing tremendous success. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. And, you know, I do understand the hesitancy. I just want to give my perspective on sharing school to school, because we want to be careful. I mean, also the idea of pointing at particular, pointing at particular teachers or particular circumstances versus recognizing that children are all individuals, regardless of where they go, what elementary school they go to. And I do know that this district does a tremendous amount of work to ensure that there is an equitable experience among all 6 elementary schools, while also recognizing and acknowledging that they are individual schools with they're individual kids. So I thank you for that. I just wanted to share that perspective. And I love that you talked about the fact that you adjust pacing, and because that is so important. You know, pacing calendars are very important, but, you know, they should be something that teachers can look at, but not necessarily, Mrs. Jones in grade 3 at VP may be different in a different place than Mrs. Moore at Scotland in grade 3, based on their children. And that's a very important, that they have to have that latitude, right? Because kids are going to be driving the pace. And there are times when teachers have to stop, back up, reteach, and all that stuff. So I appreciate it. It's just so refreshing to hear the kind of things that that teachers sometimes don't hear. So I love what you guys do. I'm so incredibly impressed. And I just love that you focus on the growth. I just had one question about, and I think I've asked this before, and I just want to kind of get a clear answer as to, do you have grade 3 through 8 vertical alignment teams in ELA and math? You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
That is Ms. Johnson, Mr. Corvishly,
Okay.
Dr. Tucci, that is a lot of their work. And that is an area that we have had tremendous growth in. We do visitations, they spend time together. So that is super important. And as you know, never will stop being a priority for us. We're in different buildings. We need to do it. It's highly, highly important.
Yeah, it's so important for that, and for those teachers to see what the third graders are doing, the fourth graders. So I commend you on that. That's such an amazing thing to have, and a very important one too. So thank you for that.
It's been institutionalized. And if I could just end, I'm sorry, are you done?
Yes, I am. I want to thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to caution parents. Again, the reason this presentation is a measurement of growth and proficiency. If we just look at the proficiency and we start looking by class, I don't want to make judgments of teachers based on that number, because that teacher could have students in the class that grew 2 years, but didn't yet hit grade level standards. We teach all students, however they come to us. And here I have Dr. Shaw and his team who are going to follow us. We are here for all students, and our goal is to grow all students. And that means wherever you begin in the year. So a teacher's class, if you want to look down to that level, you can, but I would be really cautious about making a judgment about one of our teachers or about our systems and structures when you see a lower proficiency level, because that does not represent the growth of the students in that class with that teacher for that year. And I think that has been a rub for us as a district the last 4 years, as we have figured out ways to cleanly communicate this information to the community, because our job is to grow every single student that walks through that door. And proficiency itself, and that focus on proficiency, I'm sure, Ms. Moore, you remember from the older and sometimes very recent days of teaching, where the kind of tagline was focus on moving 2s to 3s. 2s to 3s. That is, what about all the rest of the students sitting in that classroom? No. Growth for all. So we want to move away from that proficiency mindset, and we want to be held accountable for how we grow students. And I think that finding that EdSite has this new scatter plot, that is helpful for us as a way to be able to demonstrate to our parent community how overall we're doing this work. And that also helps our teachers, because when our teachers see the proficiency rates and they know how much their students have grown, they too feel like, what? But look at what they did. Look what they did in the year. So really, in conclusion, and before we turn over to Dr. Shaw and his team, I just wanted to make sure that those two elements are there, and that the community knows that we are working so hard, so collaboratively with all of our teams to make that come to reality for all our students. And thank you.
Excellent job. Thank you so much. Okay, so we will move to the next item of discussion on our agenda, which is an overview of the RPS transition program.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shoa to take us through this and his team.
Thank you, Ms. Gillette, and thank you so much to the board for having us this morning. That presentation is a perfect segue to introduce two of my colleagues for an overview of programs that truly support the performance and growth of all learners who require additional supports to accomplish our district's vision of graduates who are resilient, communicative, knowledgeable, mindful, collaborative, and innovative. With that, I'm going to quickly turn it over to introduce Ms. Kate Collins, who's the coordinator of our alternative high school, and Ms. Jessica DeValentino, who's the coordinator of our transition program. I'll hand the mic over first to Ms. DeValentino, who is going to describe our transition services.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm looking forward to talking to you further about our program. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Great. So what are transition-only services? I just like to do this to set the scene before I talk specifically about the Ridgefield Transition Program. But per federal regulations, students with an IEP or individualized education plan who've met the outline requirements that you see up here on the screen, there are a few others as well per the Transition Bill of Rights, but these are kind of the heavy hitters, if you will. These students would be eligible for what we call transition-only services. Typically, transition-only services would take place after their senior year of high school and once they've met all of their credit graduation requirements. It's important to know a big part of transition-only services is that to the extent possible for the child, it should take place, their program should be at least 80% of the time within the community in which they reside. In addition to that, the focus of their programming has to include employment or employability skills, post-secondary education, and if appropriate, independent living and functional academics. Students who participate in transition-only services also have the opportunity prior to entering the program to do all of their relevant senior activities, whether it's prom, graduation especially, so they get to do all of those senior activities before they enter our program. Next slide, please. Okay, so our mission statement for the Ridgefield Transition Program is to ensure we prepare individuals with differing abilities to be active members of their communities, focusing on high-quality transition planning that focuses on strengths, interests, and needs. So currently, we have 18 students across 3 different cohorts. Our students are cohorted for the reason of what their post-school goals are. So every single student is individualized in what it is they want to achieve when they leave Ridgefield Public Schools. And so we cohort them accordingly to ensure we have alignment with the programmatic elements that we use. So for example, we have what we call a college preparation cohort in which students have expressed some interest in pursuing post-secondary education at the collegiate level. So students in this program would have access to college level courses that they can pursue on their own, while we also focus on direct instruction and support around the skills needed to be as independent as possible in taking college level coursework, organization, time management, kind of the executive functioning areas. In addition to that, we might focus on what are the support structure differences between a high school setting and a college setting. Those are 2 very different laws, IDEA and ADA. And so a big part of transition programming for this cohort is focused at understanding that and what that student needs in order to be ready to enter a college setting. Aside from our college prep cohort, we have 2 others that are have more of a focus on work. And so with that, those cohorts have work sites across the Ridgefield community. So all of those students have goals aligned to working to some degree, as well as career exploration. And students also get to engage in community outings that might be more geared towards activities of daily living. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in my future slides. But before we go to the next one, in terms of future programming, student projections are anticipated to increase exponentially over the coming years. So our district, I'm sure as you all know, analyzes our current RISE level students across all of our grade levels, pre-K all the way up to 22. And we are currently predicted to increase in just the RISE level cohort almost double from what we currently have in the next 2 years. So this information is just projected from the RISE programming alone and doesn't account for any other individual who may be referred for transition programming outside of the RISE cohort, which tends to be a large portion of our programming. So just because of this, I want to reiterate the necessity for a larger, more accessible space continues to be a huge need for our program. Next slide, please. So some of the highlights, as I mentioned earlier, we have to have programming that covers employment. And so some of those areas include vocational training or work sampling. I mentioned that earlier, where students rotate between various community employment sites, and that allows them to learn key employability skills as well as further develop what areas of interest they may have. In addition to those weekly regular sites that our students have, we also offer career exploration, which might be for a student who maybe is able to hold a part-time job and has done that before and has demonstrated success, but perhaps they need a little bit more support in understanding what are my career options? How does that align to my individual profile and my needs? And also, how does that align to my post-secondary education options? So that is just in employment alone, some of the work that we do with students. I did talk a little bit about post-secondary education in terms of our college prep cohort, but post-secondary education does not just mean college. And so that's the part I'd like to highlight in this is when we look at students who may not be entering a college setting, which is a handful of our students, we like to focus on, well, what are the further education and training opportunities that do exist within their community, whether it's related to employability, independent living skills, or areas of interest. And so those are ways that we're also supporting students in the post-secondary education category. Next slide, please. So activities of daily living I had mentioned as well. So the one thing that I also want to point out, as you saw with the employment category that we focus on in terms of instruction, is all of the skills that we're practicing require some type of generalization into the Ridgefield community. So I mentioned a lot about employment and our job sites within the community. We also cover money management. And so what that looks like is we provide direct instruction on budgeting. Our students all receive paychecks. And so we are using those real life opportunities to teach into that and give them the opportunity of, well, I worked 9 hours this week. That means I'm going to make X amount of dollars. And so it's real life experiences is what they're doing. Meal preparation, we work with a local First Congregational Church, and they have a beautiful kitchen that they are allowing us to use right now for our group cooking instruction. Prior to those cooking lessons, students are out at Stop and Shop. They're anticipating what they need in order to make recipes. So they're doing kind of all that work in advance to then go out into the community and generalize those skills. So I really want to focus on everything that we do requires that community generalization. In addition to those two areas, we also focus on health and wellness. We have complimentary memberships through Parks and Rec. They are wonderful partners of us. We have students even trialing a Zumba class next week, so that'll be super exciting. And then lastly, in general, we have done a wonderful job over the past few years expanding our community partners. We recently did a wonderful trip to the Aldrich Museum. We've worked with the Ridgefield Police Department, the Ridgefield Historical Society. So having students understand what exists in their community, how to access it, and doing that through an inquiry-based learning lens. So it's been super important throughout our programming that we have the access and the direct access to the community because it's truly what the purpose of transition-only services is. Next slide, which I believe will go to Kate Collins with the Alternative High School. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Kate Collins, the Alternative High School Coordinator. Thank you again for having Jess and me on to talk about RTP and the A School. In the bubbles on this slide, you can read 2 student quotes. One of my favorite things to do before presenting information is to ask the students what they would like you all to know. So this time we have a nice little community here, and relationships with teachers make it easier to learn. What I asked before I presented to the new teachers at the high school last month, my favorite quote so far is very small, very chill. So that's just a little piece from the students. We can go on to the next slide. Here you can see the RHS mission statement as well as our current A School mission and vision. These missions are inherently connected as the A School is an off-site program of the high school. So in Ridgefield, we do want to make sure that all students are finding success while in high school, and perhaps even more importantly, starting to envision and plan for their futures after high school. And at the A School, we're able to provide different support for those that need it in order to make progress in those 2 areas. We can go to the next slide. When it comes to the design of the program, we find that the 2 most essential features are that it is off-site and the class sizes are kept small. So the physical distance from RHS gives students space to focus on developing their confidence as learners and their identities as young adults. And they continue to have access to RHS, which I will talk more about on the next slide. But just generally speaking, I think it's important that we're able to keep the program small. The teachers here are opening the door every morning, letting students in. We can kind of feel out how they're doing for the day. And keeping the program small and keeping the classes small. Our rosters here range from anywhere between 3 to 8 students, with our elective classes usually having a few more students than like a math class might, just because we do switch up the electives every year. So if we have a cool class here, we want to make sure any student that's interested in taking it can. And having these small rosters naturally allows students to get some additional academic support while maintaining the standards of the course. And it also gives teachers the ability to prioritize building rapport and relationships. So as you saw in my first slide, I think students emphasize that relationships with teachers are really important. And they say that teachers are accessible, they're approachable, and that's what makes it easier to ask questions and learn. And I think the relationships that can be built in a smaller setting like the A school really make all the difference in our student success here. I'm going to rattle off a list that's sort of my most frequently asked questions as related to our schedule and our courses. So we do follow a block schedule similar to the high school, which does make it easier for our students that follow a hybrid schedule. So students that spend some time here and at the high school, and it does make it more efficient for teachers that are coming down. But one difference in our schedule is RHS has flex first thing in the morning, and we've placed ours right before lunch. So we find that once the day's gotten rolling and then we can all meet together for flex, we get a little bit more engagement. And our flex is really the whole group together focused on something community building related. And it's usually run by our lovely social worker that we have here. Another question I often get is how many classes are we able to run at a time? So we will have 2 classes run during each block, and we can't have every single class that's offered at, we're still on the other slide. Thank you. So we can't have every single class that's offered at the high school every year. So classes will rotate. So for example, this year for science courses, we have chemistry and physics. So it's highly likely that next year we would offer biology. But we do look each summer at the students that are returning to the A school and determine which classes to prioritize based on the students that we'll have. And if we're not offering a class that a student might need, and maybe they're not ready to go to the high school to take it, we'll consider utilizing one of our online platforms like Apex or Admenta. Another important thing to note is that students here are working toward the same graduation requirements that students at RHS are. So if students end up graduating from here, they will earn the same diploma that Ridgefield High School students do, and they're encouraged to attend the graduation there. And I sort of already spoke about this, but we do offer different electives every year. So just to name a few that we've had in the last couple of years, we've had personal finance, oceanography, hero's journey, media production. You can see the picture on the top here. That's a picture from media production. We've had film criticism, intro to philosophy. I could go on, but we do switch that up every year. And then lastly, on this slide, the most important aspect, the students, the reason that we have this program in the first place. We do work with students from 9th to 12th grade, and students may or may not have IEPs or 504s. And we sort of get referrals from 2 directions. One from the high school, from the school team there, the counselor would refer a student to me. And then the other direction could be from someone like Dr. Shoa or Dr. Hanaway. If there's a student that's currently in a private placement, they may and interested in coming back into district, we would have a student come that way. And our referral can occur for a lot of reasons, and I really don't like to generalize. I like to speak about the program and students as if they're listening to me speak, but it usually does boil down to a student struggling to make some sort of progress, whether it's socially, emotionally, whether it's academically. But while the high school does have so many amazing resources and structures in place, sometimes it's just determined that a smaller setting is really what that student might need. So we would have a meeting with the school team, and then we would loop the family in to come for a visit, and then the student would come to shadow, and we take all that information together to decide if this is the appropriate setting for that student. Okay, we can go to the next slide now. Thank you. Once we determine that the A school is the appropriate fit for a student, we'll create a plan that's really customized to their needs. So this involves the student, their parents, our social worker, me, anyone that knows them well from the high school, and we'll make a plan. It might initially prioritize something like credit recovery or making up work that they've missed in classes, previously, and then we'll monitor that plan. That plan will evolve. And I'll just note that, again, these plans are different for every student. Each student is working at their own pace, and we have a different goal for all students in mind. And it's important that students understand they continue to have access to and are welcome at RHS. So they can attend assemblies, they'll attend events, they're encouraged to participate in clubs and sports. But interest in accessing RHS does vary. And we recognize that there are other ways to be involved in the community and to be preparing for post-secondary paths that don't involve going to the high school if that's not something that fits within that student's plan at that time. So I think that covers the most important things to know about the A school. I didn't cover everything on each slide just in the interest of time, so I'm more than happy to answer any questions anyone may have or elaborate on anything further.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much. Can I just get back? Oh, good. So I can see everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Jessica, for those comprehensive presentations. Two very impressive programs offered here. So any questions for them, Mr. Paradiso?
Sure. When have I not had questions? Ms. Di Valentino, thank you so much. I really appreciate the dive in. I love the pictures. Honestly, it seems like you guys are having a lot of fun, not just doing important stuff, which is kind of cool. One of the things that I had a thought about when we were talking about, helping them look for career opportunities and get used to being in the workplace is, do they need help, the participants, at all getting banking or I often, just coming from a different lens in my professional world, I know that sometimes being banked is not always easy when you first start working. And I was curious if that's something that's part of our program, if we have partnerships with any of the institutions in town, so that when they get a paycheck, they know what to do with it.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have a partnership with actually Fairfield County Bank. And the reason being, sometimes we have individuals who their parents may obtain guardianship, conservatorship. That's not always the case, but that does sometimes lend itself to what you alluded to earlier. It might be difficult to open up checking accounts, or students are just kind of obtaining it on their own. So yes, we do have active partnerships with them who help with kind of stepping over those potential barriers.
That's amazing to hear. And I'm glad to hear it's FCB, because it's sort of like we've got such a presence with them in town that it's sort of part of the program. So that's pretty cool. And the last question on the transition program, I was curious, like, are we putting technology skills into the curriculum at all, in terms of not sort of as simplistic as, do you have an email address? But I'm sure that's important as well. But how to use some of these tools, and as we try to get this cohort to be employable, these are the kinds of things that I know if I was interviewing somebody I would ask as well.
Yes, wonderful question. We do focus on technology, as well as we have a ton of conversations. We have a social skills element around safety, around the use of technology, how that's implemented within employment and a post-secondary setting. We had a guest speaker actually from our director of security earlier this year with a Ridgefield Police Department officer. So yes, wonderful questions. That is fully integrated within our programming as it most closely relates to their employment and their post-secondary settings. So it's a wonderful question.
Thank you. Ms. Collins, I had a couple of questions for you as well. When we talk about so the social worker was part-time, Are these all employees of the district? Are we using agencies for any of these services? I was curious because I know in the past sometimes it's been difficult to sort of fill these kinds of roles, especially if it's 0.5 or something similar.
Sure, I can answer that actually, Mr. Paradiso. The social worker who is our part-time and dedicated to the alternative high school is a contracted individual. However, as you probably heard Dr. De Silva say last night, where we prioritize in-district contracts when we can. So that's something that we analyze as the position may become vacant. We're always considering whether or not it is more efficient and better for the students as a contracted position or something that's in-house. But as a part-time position, yes, it's always, I think we probably talked about that at many different Board of Ed meetings. Part-time positions are always more difficult to fill than full-time positions. So we do cast that net, if you will, when the position has become vacant so that we get the very best individual suited to the need of the child. Do you have any thing to add to that, Ms. Collins?
I would just say, I acknowledge it can be tricky to fill out part-time position, but I think we've had luck because in a position like a social worker, perhaps you have a private practice, so it actually works out perfectly for the individual that we have now, because she has other things going on, and we get to benefit from her expertise a few hours a day, and it's been great to have her.
Thank you both. And then my last question on the alternative high school is one of the slides sort of talked about like post secondary experience. Does the cohort attending the alternative high school have access to sort of the same guidance counseling? I know I taught a million years ago. I went through this, so it's probably very different now. But that was important for me, right? Like, an understanding what my options were and feeling like I can just knock on a door and talk to somebody. And that's one of the things when we talk about proximity. I wonder is that more difficult for this cohort to sort of have that same kind of experience, sort of like thinking ahead for their own post-secondary experience.
So our students here do keep their counselors from the high school, so they maintain that relationship, which I think is especially helpful because I did mention like some students will be incrementally like working their way back to the high school, so then they have that connection there. But we set up times where the counselors will send a few down to do like a session with different grade levels. And then along with that, we have special ed teachers here who are working on the goal and objective side of things, which also involves exploring post-secondary options. And we have a great connection with our pal, Jess Valentino over here that also supports.
Thank you both so much. This is something I think the whole community should be proud of, and especially you both. So thanks for all your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Paradiso. Excellent questions. I had overlap with a few of them. Those were great. Thank you. And I concur. This is so important for the community, this information. I thank you both for all your hard work and for making such a difference in the lives of kids. And, it's so clear that you both love what you do. And we are so incredibly grateful and lucky to have you. And so are the kids. I love, Kate, I love that you asked for the quotes. That's just everything right there. It's great. And thank you for sharing that with us. It speaks volumes about how important relationships are to the kids and how a close, trusted relationship between a student and a teacher can change a life. And that's exactly what you do. So thank you so much. And I think these presentations have really, I hope, will help to dispel some of the misinformation out in the community about the programs. And you really stressed the reasons and the importance as to why both of these programs need to be outside of the high school for different reasons, but they need to be outside of the high school. And I love that you offer the hybrid, for the alternative high school. Some kids may be working their way back, some kids may not, but as we said earlier in the growth, talking about growth and how each child is an individual. And this is just incredible. These are incredible programs for our kids. And I'm just so incredibly impressed. I had one question for Ms. Valentino about the transition program, you mentioned that we have a partnership. I love all the partnerships we have with the community. It's so awesome. That we have this partnership with the Congregational Church to use their kitchen. Is the plan, I don't even know if this is the right place to ask this, but is the plan to have a kitchen in the new facility? Hopefully? Or
Yes.
will you? Okay.
Yes, it is. I don't know if I can share that, but it is.
Well, I guess like I'm assuming that ideally that would be the best thing for you,
Yes.
right? So that you didn't have to go off site. Okay. So that was really my question. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I appreciate
Oh, not at all. That's a great question.
Okay.
We have envisioned the new building with an ADL facility, which is the activities of daily living sort of component of the transition program. So we'll have things like a sink and a dishwasher,
Awesome.
Laundry units. However, I think it's worth acknowledging, I'm sure Jess would agree with me, that it's never going to suit all needs. And so maintaining those community partnerships in case we need an industrial kitchen with more opportunities for students to do real, sort of professional cooking will maintain.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. Thank you for that. And one question for Ms. Collins, which is you were talking about, I appreciate you sharing how referrals are made to the alternative high school. Is it possible for a parent to make a referral?
I have gotten calls from parents that I think are looking up like alternative programs in the area. And we'll usually have a conversation, like I'll share information about the program, but then I'll encourage them to loop in the high school team or if it's Dr. So or Dr. Hanaway, so that we can streamline the process a little bit more. But yeah, parents will definitely inquire, and then we'll just take it from there.
Okay. No, that's great to know. So they can initiate and then kind of go through the RHS. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. So impressive. Yes. Ms. Gillette.
So I just want to compliment Ms. Valentino, Ms. Collins. We are so lucky in this district. You can feel the heart and the soul that they put into this work every day. And Ms. Moore, I think selecting these presentations in one session is just seamlessly connected. This really is about growth for all students, regardless of how you come to us, who you are, what your needs are. It is our job to grow you and have the facilities to do so, have the flexibility like Ms. Collins talked about for kids who are a little bit in the high school, but need the small community of the alternative high school, or students who have different pathways that Ms. Valentino is supporting and helping them connect in the community and start to find their place as adults. So I just, I knew intellectually that this all went together, but just sitting here and listening and again, just being so proud to be part of this team, it's just like a seamless connection around growth. And thank you for allowing us to share that with you today.
Absolutely. Thank you. I feel the exact same way. I have such a warm feeling in my heart listening to all of this. This is really something that I'm passionate about, and I'm so incredibly impressed and grateful for all of you. There's nothing more important in a community than supporting our kids, and that's exactly what you do. So thank you all. And any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, thank you all, and I will adjourn the meeting and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you all.